Okay, grade 9, this is our last lesson in our biology unit, and it's about adaptive behavior. This is a little bit more complicated because it's not quite as black and white as other components of evolution, but behavior is really interesting, so we're going to look at lots of different examples to help you guys understand the general kind of patterns and rules that this follows. At this point, you should have all four big ideas done. You can add a little bit of information to this one based on today's lesson, but it should be mostly done by now. You're welcome, and you should be uploading it to today's post, so your teacher can give feedback on it. When you're studying for unit tests next week, these four big ideas should be central to your review. They will definitely show up on your unit test. Those are the four things that are most important for you to understand from this entire unit. Okay, so here's your template for today's lesson. Adaptive behavior is our title, and there's 5 kind of different sections of this lesson. This actually can be, if you have a small notebook, this might not be enough space for you. So if you want to, you can always do a title and then don't put lines, kind of give yourself some space to be more adaptive in your note-taking based on how much you'll write down. You might need to go to a third page depending on how much space you take up with your handwriting and your drawings, but make sure you draw the 2 drawings that are required and you put the titles and subtitles in. Okay, but you're welcome to kind of do that as you go because these are the slide titles, so you'll know when you switch to a new one. Okay, so let's start by looking at an example here. Honeybees, or Apis mellifera, they live in a very interesting society organization called a caste system. It's a hierarchical society in which there's very specific roles given to specific individuals. The queen is the only female who reproduces. And then there's drones who are males who will also breed, but they usually only get a chance to, they breed one time only, and then they die. So the queen breeds many times for many years, and lays lots and lots of eggs. The drones breed one time and die, and the workers are female, and they don't get to reproduce. They just work for the hive. They build things, they help make honey, they go and forage for pollen and for nectar, they do all those kinds of tasks. So how could that possibly evolve where we have a species in which not all individuals reproduce? We've been talking so much about how reproduction and survival are the goals of any individual. And so why would a worker bee choose to not reproduce but still work for others in its community? This is a great example of where behavior gets a little more complicated. So one part of the reason why this happens in bees is because the workers are very close to the queen and to the drones. They're all really close to each other because they all share a lot of the genes, especially the workers and the queen. So even though they don't get to reproduce, if they help take care of the hive and keep the queen healthy and keep the offspring that she lays healthy, they're still helping to pass on a portion of their genes because these two share a lot of DNA. So behavior is this complicated and I find it really interesting part of evolutionary biology. And it's basically, if you sum it up down to the basic idea of it, is how organisms react to different stimuli. So if you give an organism a stimulus, how it's going to react is its behavior. Now the stimulus are things that are going to encounter, and it triggers some sort of response in the individual. So think about the honeybees here a second. What kind of stimuli might a honeybee encounter? Well, they can encounter other bees, of course, would be a stimulus. There's honey, there's parts of the hive. If they're a bee who leaves the hive, there's flowers. There's other insects like spiders and spider webs, wasps. There's the flowers. There's the weather, the wind, how cold it is. All those kinds of things are going to be stimuli that the bees have to choose to interact with in one way or another. And the way they interact, the way they behave when they encounter those different stimuli, that's really key to kind of who they are as an individual and how they will survive. So because environments change all the time, much quicker than we can actually adapt and evolve, behavior is really important to survival. So organisms have to be able to to respond to the different stimuli in a changing environment, right? The weather changes all the time. We can't just be like, oh, my DNA doesn't code for being warm enough to be able to survive this cold weather, and therefore I'm going to die. No, they have some sort of behavior that helps them deal with that stimulus. But to deal with stimulus, we have to have sense organs. We have to be able to tell and interact with it so some sort of thing is changing, there's some sort of stimulus happening. So sense organs vary species to species, and they send information from the sense organs to the brain, which then tells the body system what to do. So for example, right now as I'm talking to you, I'm sensing the sound of my voice. I'm sensing what I'm seeing on the slides. I'm sensing what I'm touching over here on the screen, to make sure, and then my brain is taking in all that information and it's reacting. It's causing my mouth to move so I can speak. It's causing my hands to move because I'm a hand talker. It's causing all these different things to come together to accomplish a task, which is making this lesson for you guys. So the brain tells the body systems to then react to that response, to coordinate a response. So for example, and often a good example one is movement. You react to the stimulus. Maybe you're walking down the street and a car just drives really quickly up to you. It happens to me a lot of time in the robot. The car just kind of zooms right by and I have to react to that stimulus. I have to choose to keep walking across the street quickly or go back or stop. I have to react. And my muscles will help me react to that. So use this diagram here of the bee and look at the different sense organs a bee has and describe how a bee might interact with a flower if the flower is its stimulus. Flowers are really important for bees to collect honey, to collect nectar that they use to make honey. Okay, so hopefully you made some notes here about the antennae are going to help it locate the flower. It can smell the flower in the air. It can tell how fast it's moving by the antenna. It can make sure it gets really close and finds the right flower. The compound eyes are going to help us see some color. So a lot of flowers have coloration patterns that help guide the pollinators to the center of the flower. So bees will tend to go to flowers that have bright colors, and they'll find that, like red flowers, they'll find those flowers more easily. Okay, then you have the maxilla here to suck up the nectar from a flower. That's super important. And those are the three main ones that are going to be interacting when it's going to find a flower and then add an actual flower. Okay, so these are another great example of what are called innate behaviors. So a lot of time you've heard the word instincts, right? You tell an animal has the instinct to do this, or you have an instinct of something, like a gut feeling. The name for that in biology is an innate behavior. And those are behaviors that organisms know to do without being taught. They already are born knowing how to do the behavior. A lot of the time, those behaviors are controlled by a mix of genetics and hormones. So, for example, we have a flight response in humans where if you feel threatened, your response is to either fight or run. And that's not a conscious choice. That's an innate behavior. Your body is sending hormones to tell you to have that response. And a key component of innate behavior is that the first time an organism encounters a stimulus, if it reacts in a specific way, then that's an innate behavior. It doesn't have to learn that behavior, it just knows what to do automatically. So a great example of this is the waggle dance. I don't know if you guys already knew about this or not, but bees dance. They dance to communicate where food sources are. So if you look here, here's a whole group of bees, and one individual bee would come right here, it would waggle, 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 and then loop around, and then waggle again, and then loop around. And the participants have been studying this for a long time to figure out what bees were saying, and what they're communicating is the angle of the dance indicates the angle from the sun to the food source. The amount of time that they waggle in their loop tells you the distance. So you should draw this drawing here. So 1 second of waggling means it's 1 kilometer to the food source. And then the angle shows you how far it is to that food source. So I want to show you this little video clip of the waggle dance. I linked it with the sound on the Schoology post. You can watch it again, but it just kind of shows you how this works. Notice how the bee is looping around and waggling. So look at this dance here. It's waggling to show the distance and direction. So they know the food is 90 degrees left of the sun because that's the angle at which to be danced. In this case, it's 60 degrees to the right. And all the bees can understand this dance and they can do this dance without having to be taught. Okay, so what would be the evolutionary benefits of the honeybees being born able to dance and to understand dance and communicate? Well, it's a huge adaptation to be able to share information about where food sources are. We know energy is a huge selection factor in evolution, and if organisms can find a food source, they can get energy. And if they can share that, and because honeybees work collectively in this case system, the more workers who find a food source and bring that back, more beneficial for everybody. Okay, let's get some other examples here. So other innate behaviors would be example aquatic species that are born knowing how to swim. Okay, baby dolphins know how to swim when they're born. They need a little bit of help with directions, but they don't just flail around the water. They know how to swim when they're born. Birds know how to build nests without having to be taught. Spiders know how to build webs without being taught. And of course, bees have their waggle dance. So innate behaviors tend to be behaviors in which a mistake in that behavior will have a really severe consequence for the organism. So what might be some consequences for a spider that can't make a web, or a bird who can't build a nest, or a dolphin who can't swim, or a bee who can't dance? What are some consequences for those organisms? Well, a spider who can build a web can't get food. Spiders get their webs, so their food from flying into their web, getting caught, and they can eat it. Birds can't make a nest, they can't have shelter, and they can't to lay their eggs and pass on their genes to the next generation. Dolphins who can't swim are going to drown. They have to breathe air at the surface. They can't escape predators. It's a really important skill for any marine organism. And of course, bees who can't dance can't communicate where food is, and they can't go listen to understand the dance of another bee and figure out where food is. So they're pretty severe things. They're all about food and survival. Whereas a learned behavior is a behavior that organism has to learn from its parents, other individuals, or on its own. Now, these behaviors tend to be ones that may be beneficial to survival, but they're not 100% necessary. You can survive without learning that behavior in most situations. But it might help you to be more effective at hunting or to survive better if you learn that additional behavior. Okay, so the next part here is cost and benefit analysis. So there's 3 different potential cost kind of categories for behavior. The first one is energy cost. So how much energy is it costing the organism to do that behavior versus how much energy will it save? So for example, I'm using energy right now to talk to you guys to make this lesson. If I didn't do this behavior, I would save energy, but then I wouldn't be doing my job and I wouldn't get paid and I couldn't buy food. So it's worth the energy cost of doing my job because that's how this works in our society, right? Or it's worth the cost of an organism going out for honeybee going out to look for flowers, even though it costs energy because it needs to get the energy in the form of nectar for its hive. The risk cost, the risk of being killed or injured versus the cost of doing nothing. So a good example of this would be like giraffes fighting. The 2 male giraffes are going to fight, the right to mate. That's a big risk. If they fight and one gets injured and loses, it could die. But if it doesn't risk it, then it's not going to get to mate at all. So there's a cost analysis here. Opportunity cost. So if you choose to do a certain behavior, you can't do a different behavior. So for example, here I am, I'm sitting here doing this lesson for you guys, and the time it's for me to do this, I can't do other things. So I can't do some exercise, I can't go to the grocery store, I can't do other things, I'm doing this instead. And that's a cost. A really good example of this is swarming behavior in bats. So a lot of the times bats are nocturnal, right? And they will leave a cave all together in one big swarm at nighttime to go and hunt insects, go for looking for fruit in the forest, all kind of together. So a swarm is a big group of organisms. It happens in insects, happens in birds, happens in bats, when they grow all together at one time, move together. So there are some benefits to this and there's some cost to this. I want you to use these two pictures to help you kind of think about those two, benefits and costs of this. So pause the video and think about it for a second. So some of the benefits are going to be safety in numbers, right? Individuals in the center of the swarm are going to be really safe from predators. They're also going to confuse predators with the swarming kind of flight patterns. It's harder for predators to catch them. And they're more likely to be successful in finding food because there's so many more pairs of eyes to look for it. But there are costs. A swarm can attract predators. So individuals who are on the edges of the swarm are more likely to be caught by, this is a raptor, to catch it. And maybe a bat hawk. This could be an example of a bat hawk catching a bat. And those ones on the middle are going to be safe, but on the edges are not going to be so safe. Excuse me. Another factor might be when they do find food, they have to share between all these individuals. It's not just one individual up there finds a bunch of insects, they can eat its fill and then go back to the cave. It has to share with all of those bats. So there's costs and benefits to this behavior. And so the ones are risk cost, energy cost, and opportunity cost, all three. So here's some other examples here. Some of you should already be familiar with. So birds of paradise displaying, a male bird of paradise displaying, that's an opportunity cost. Why is that? Well, the time that bird of paradise spends displaying, hanging upside down, dancing, singing for females, it can't spend that time foraging for food. It can't spend that time doing other tasks it needs to do to survive, building a nest, whatever. It's just dancing, hoping to get a chance to mate. So it's choosing to spend its energy and its time in that way. Risk, we have elk here. The elk fighting, right, to mate. That's a risk. Maybe an elk will get injured and won't be able to survive the next generation. Maybe it'll win and get to mate. It's a risk cost. Energy cost. Here we have turtles basking in the sun. Turtles are cold-blooded, right? They're ectotherms, so they're going to need to move into the sun to warm up. So it costs them energy to swim through the water to the log, climb up on the log. That costs them energy, but they get energy from the sun warming them up. So it's an energy cost, but energy benefit as well. So opportunity cost, risk cost, and energy cost. Okay, some benefits. Survivorship and reproduction are the two goals of every individual and every species as a whole. So that's the main benefit, is just those two things. We don't need to categorize it even further. An example of an innate behavior is fleeing from a predator. And fleeing from a predator, we kind of talked about it, is always a beneficial behavior. If you're being tracked by a cheetah, you're going to run. And that's something you do automatically without thinking. Babies will do instead of thinking. It's innate behavior, but it's always beneficial. But many predators, like these two cheetahs here, will work together to take down a prey. So what's the cost-benefit analysis of that kind of behavior, of this cooperative hunting behavior? Well, the benefit is they're probably more successful at hunting. Right? If you have more than one individual hunting, it's harder for the prey to escape. Maybe one cheetah could be over here blocking its escape, and one cheetah is catching it. A lot of prey, they have evolved to be really good at running from predators, at dodging them. If there's multiple predators, it's really hard, much harder to escape them. But the cost is now they have to share that energy. They don't get it all to themselves. So if the benefits outweigh the cost, then the behavior will be expressed. This can connect back as well to our survivorship curves. So if you think about type 1, we have a lot of parental care, that's a cost benefit. So it's a cost on the parents to take care of that baby for a long time, for humans, until they're 18 or even older. But the benefit is that their DNA is more likely to survive the next generation. Whereas in things like plants, it's a really low cost, but most of the individuals are going to die, so low benefit, whereas birds are kind of in the middle, right? So all these things come back to a cost benefit analysis. Okay, let's talk about social behavior. So organisms who live in groups, they often have specific group behaviors. And a great example of this is pronking. So springboks, the national animal of South Africa, shout out to Jody here, they do something called pronking. So if they catch a predator, if an individual catches it, spots a predator, then an individual will pronk. It'll jump straight up into the air instead of running away. And that's a really interesting behavior because what that does, it warns the rest of the herd. It lets the predator know they've been spotted, but that individual is now targeted. Now the predator knows, okay, well, everyone else has warning, but that one just saw me. Maybe I can try and catch it. So it's putting itself at higher risk. Why would it do that? Why would it pronk instead of running away? Well, it's going to be protecting its entire herd, its group, and maybe a lot of those ones aren't related to it. Maybe some of it are its offspring, or its parents, or its siblings, or nieces and nephews, first cousins. Those all share a certain amount of its DNA. Okay, so that's a social behavior. Social behaviors are all behaviors that are interactions by and between individuals of the same species. And there are three main types of social behaviors: communication, mate selection, and defense. So here, this is a communication behavior. Here we have schooling a fish to avoid a predator. Okay, that's for defense and communication as well. They're all avoiding each other, avoiding the predator by kind of schooling together. Here's some other examples. So here's a blue-footed bobby again, and they dance to show off their lovely blue feet and choose mates. And that's a behavior between individuals of the same species, so it's mate selection. And the reason why they dance to show off their blue feet is because the more blue their feet are, the healthier they are. And this is because the food source that they eat is where they get the blue pigment in their feet. So an individual with bluer feet means it's better fed, probably better at hunting or scavenging food, and therefore it's going to have probably be better DNA. So mate selection behavior. Communication. Here's a howler monkey. I was in Costa Rica a few years ago for some research, and the howler monkeys are so loud, but they can communicate with each other about predators that are coming, and they can communicate if it's a different kind of predator. The call for a snake is different than the call for a jaguar. They can communicate about their territories. Males communicate their territories. They communicate a bunch of different things within each other's social groups. And then defense. So a lot of organisms do this kind of defensive circle behavior. These are muskox in the Arctic, and if there's a predator that comes along, what they'll do is they'll make a circle around any vulnerable individuals, usually the babies. They're going to be in the center of the circle because a wolf can't take down a big muskox like that. That's terrifying. It's big. It has horns. It's not going to beat it. But a baby muskox, a calf, is very small and easy to catch. So what they do is the adults make a circle around the offspring. Even if it's not their baby, by working together, they can make a circle around multiple babies and protect them. Okay, so the idea of a lot of social behavior is cooperation. And cooperation generally is going to increase the fitness of each individual in the group, not just the group as a whole. So every individual benefits from that cooperative behavior. A really good example, again, is we talk about hunting in groups. So lions hunt in prides, and that behavior allows them to be more successful. A lot of times you see lions where they observe their prey for a long time, and they'll make a strategy. Some will go ahead to kind of block the path for an individual. Some will stay behind to kind of scare it. They have different behaviors to help take down prey. Lions can even take down really big prey if they work together in big enough groups. And the key component to this kind of cooperation is what's called reciprocity. The idea that if an organism doesn't benefits one individual, that will be returned in the future. So if a good example here is monkeys grooming each other, this monkey is not being groomed, but it's grooming this monkey, it's grooming this monkey, and we're assuming that this monkey is going to either groom this monkey in return at some point. So it's this idea that I'm helping you and you'll help me eventually. It'll all kind of balance out. And there's been studies of things like vampire bats, where bats would help share food of individuals who can't leave to go hunt. But the bats who have shared in the past were more likely to be shared with when they couldn't go and hunt. So, and organisms do keep track of who is sharing with them and who is doing the reciprocal behaviors. Sometimes social behaviors or the cooperative behaviors are so extreme, we say it's altruistic, which we're kind of self-sacrificing the individual for the group. So for example, meerkats do what's called predator scanning. They can't look in all directions and they live in open plains. They work together to kind of scan the environment looking for predators. And an individual sees a predator is going to make a call, and that call, that sound it's going to make, makes it a target for that predator. Sometimes we're saying individually looking at one area, that reduces its own fitness. It's more likely for it to get eaten by the predator because it's made that sound than for everyone else, but everyone else has a warning to get away. So it's reducing its own fitness. Similar to how we have the worker bees not being able to reproduce, but still working together. But this makes a lot more sense if you think about what's called kin selection. So kin selection is we're thinking about children, parents, nieces and nephews, first cousins, and how much DNA they have. So for example, my niece and nephew have 25% the same DNA that I have. My siblings have 50% the same DNA. My first cousins have like 12.5% the same DNA. So my fitness is increased if they survive longer, even if it's not my offspring directly. So inclusive fitness is not just the individual, it's all their close relatives as well. And that helps explain a lot of these social behaviors. So individuals looking out for their kin and their family, not just themselves. Okay, that's the last thing I'm going to talk to you. Your task is to look at 3 different examples of learned behaviors and talk about how their fitness is. So here's 3 behaviors. They're learned. We have orcas. Some populations of orcas will beach themselves, which is ditch for whales, but to try and catch sea lions, the hunting technique. Chimpanzees who might use a tool to get some termites out, the learned behavior. And fox kids, play fighting. That's a learned behavior too, the play fighting between fox kids or puppies or wolf cubs. So you need to do a little bit of research on these 3, and do your research to figure out the cost-benefit analysis of those behaviors and how those behaviors might have evolved. Go back to those 4 principles of natural selection. So how did this behavior of beaching to hunt, how did that evolve? How did that become beneficial to pass on to the next generation? Okay, make sure you write clear answers with detail in your notes so your teacher can give you feedback to help you review for the test. Because you're definitely going to have to talk about the 4 principles and some example analysis on your test, so practice. You also take some time to go back to our phenomenon. If you remember, our phenomenon was about the evolution of skin color. So I will link the video on the post you can watch again if you want to, and you should be answering these 2 things. So write down, what did you learn about evolution, how species have evolved over time, what did you learn about that? And what do you think is the answer to this question now? What do you know now compared to what you thought then? So what's the answer to this question is what you put here. And then what did you learn about in this unit? Write kind of a list. Okay, so for today's homework, it's a longer lesson. You need to complete all the notebook pages. Should be at least 2 pages of notes, if not 3. Make sure you have the 3 case studies analyzed to get feedback. And you have your unit phenomenon page and your big ideas page as well. Alright guys, I hope you found this unit interesting, and I will be posting some review resources for you over the course of the weekend. Next week will be review time, and your tests are next week. Hope you've already signed up, and hope you have a great weekend, guys. Take care of yourselves.